Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more.
Like her father, Professor Mike Hill, my girlfriend Amy was exceptionally intelligent. He was a prolific inventor, and with a biochemistry degree, she was invaluable in assisting his research. He excelled not only in studying brain function but also in business, smartly capitalizing on his discoveries with various companies. This success allowed him to build a state-of-the-art private laboratory on his country estate near Horsham, Sussex. The lab boasted cutting-edge technology, much of which he personally designed to meet his exacting standards. While I'm no slouch myself, I often struggled to fully grasp their work, despite their patient explanations. They understandably omitted key details for security reasons, leaving me with only a vague understanding of their complex projects. Thus began an extraordinary journey that both amazed and occasionally embarrassed me. Taking a month off work, I stayed with Amy and her father, eager to learn about his latest project. They kindly agreed to show me around the lab, knowing I wouldn't fully comprehend the intricacies just by observing. One afternoon, I stepped into the lab with them. The lab was impressively equipped with electronic gear scattered throughout, clearly indicating substantial investment. At the center were two medical examination couches, each adorned with wires and sensors leading to a large metal box adorned with switches and dials. Intrigued and impressed, I wasted no time in asking about its purpose. "Well," Mike began, "it's related to thought transfer. Our brain's thoughts can be seen as electromagnetic patterns. For the past 3 years, I've been working on converting these patterns into a binary code that can be stored in a computer, much like images and sound. However, unlike simple video signals, this is far more complex and challenging to store. My system aims to capture every memory, physical sensation, and even a person's emotions, a complete replication of their personality." "But that sounds impossible," I remarked skeptically. "I mean, I've heard of the concept in theory, but as far as I know, no computer has that much storage capacity." Mike glanced at me, smiling confidently. "What you're saying was true until about 6 months ago," he declared proudly. "Thanks to a unique compression system I've developed, I've achieved exactly that. I can not only download every bit of information from someone's brain and store it indefinitely on my computer, but I can also perfectly replicate it without any impact on their own faculties." I struggled to believe what I was hearing, but there was more to come. "And not only that," Amy added, "by downloading the memory banks of 2 people, we can swap them and exchange their memories. In essence, we can switch their minds." She recounted an initial experiment with a cat and a dog, where the results were amusing but temporary. They quickly returned the animals to their original states. Later on, we moved to human volunteers. So far, we've successfully swapped minds for over a month without any signs of deterioration. 3 months ago, our friends Alan and his wife agreed to a mind swap after some persuasion. They found it enlightening, even addictive, experiencing life from each other's perspectives. This stretched my credulity beyond its limit. Always a skeptic, I couldn't swallow this. "You're joking, right?" I retorted. "Amy, come on, this is impossible. It's like something out of science fiction. Do you really expect me to believe you can swap people's minds? Honestly, it sounds absurd. I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but this is just too much." Taken aback by my outburst, "I don't tolerate nonsense," Amy looked disappointed. "Oh dear, I feared you might react this way," she sighed. "What specifically troubles you about the idea?" I paused, trying to collect my thoughts to articulate my fundamental objections without dismissing her outright. "Okay," I began, "let's start with a moral consideration. Let's suppose, hypothetically, that this concept works. Imagine you're connected at one end, and a blind, elderly person with limited mobility is connected at the other. You swap minds for 24 hours. For you, it's just one day in a world of darkness and disability where you can't even request basic needs. Knowing it's temporary, you might endure it. But what about the other person? How would they feel after experiencing a single precious day of normalcy, only to return to their permanent nightmare? Amy, how do you reconcile that dilemma? Amy remained silent for a moment. She glanced away, sniffed, then looked back at me with tears in her eyes. Do you think we haven't thought about that? She replied softly. Daniel, we've considered this issue for a long time. That's why we've focused on preserving every mental faculty of a person as a single file in the computer. Despite my father's advanced work in data compression, we can currently only store the minds of about 8 people in our entire memory banks. You have no idea how much space that requires. It's enough to run a country. But you mentioned ethics, and we've certainly wrestled with ethical questions, Amy continued. We've always used willing subjects who are healthy and mentally sound to avoid such moral dilemmas. We believe that if we replace the entire memory of one person with another, even temporarily, the swapped mind shouldn't necessarily endure the unpleasant conditions of the mind it displaced, like your example of the blind elderly person. There's also a positive application of this technology. If we can download and reprogram a person's mind, think of the potential in treating mental illness. We could remove the causes of harmful behaviors in criminals and replace them with benevolent personalities, avoiding the severe side effects of procedures like frontal lobotomies, which can leave individuals devoid of their own will. No, she continued, we've devised a much better solution. As I mentioned earlier, we can preserve any mind in a state of stasis within the computer, even duplicating it indefinitely. We can adjust it, though we're cautious about the ethical implications. This means we don't need to subject the displaced mind to an unpleasant environment. Instead, we can store it unchanged and unconscious in the computer, thus preventing suffering. The physical body, which we refer to as vacated, remains unconscious, with all bodily functions maintained akin to any unconscious person. When we restore the original mind, the person wakes as if from a deep sleep. In fact, Dad has developed a method to induce pleasant dreams that make the subject reluctant to awaken. He's currently exploring ways to insert artificially produced thoughts as well. When fully conscious again, they seamlessly pick up where they left off. The main challenge we've encountered is helping individuals readjust to their own bodies after experiencing another. Different people handle it differently, which is why we've limited trials to a select group who adapt well. Mary and Alan, for instance, have undergone multiple swaps without any adverse effects. Interestingly, they seem to adjust more easily with each experience, almost becoming casual about it. By now, I had run out of things to say. Though still skeptical about the feasibility of the entire concept, I realized everyone else believed in it. Out of politeness, I chose not to argue further for the moment. However, I sensed Amy's determination to convince me, and I knew it would take something significant for her to do so. She glanced at me, sighed with disappointment briefly, and paused to gather her thoughts. A long silence followed as she looked around the room, avoiding eye contact. Then, she met my gaze directly and suddenly smiled, as if struck by an idea. It was unsettling, as I could sense it involved me, yet she kept her thoughts to herself for now. Breaking the silence, Amy said, "Well, my dear, I do want to find a way to prove it to you eventually. But I suspect you might not enjoy being proven wrong. You're too proud. You have many admirable qualities, my love, but humility isn't one of them." Anticipating where she might be heading, I interjected, "No way. Absolutely not. If you think I'll let you experiment on my brain, forget it. That's out of the question." Amy studied me thoughtfully for a moment, smiled, and replied, "Of course. It was just a passing thought." Checking her watch, she added, "I need to make a phone call. I'll leave you and Dad to chat." With that, she left us to continue the laboratory tour, and we moved back to the house for a cup of tea, leaving the topic of mind transference behind. Thinking that was the end of it, I dismissed what seemed to me a far-fetched idea for the next few days. Then, on the following Tuesday, Amy informed me that their friends Alan and Mary were arriving that afternoon and staying overnight. They were the couple who had supposedly volunteered for a mind swap, and I eagerly anticipated questioning them about the experiment to prove it was nonsense. That afternoon, we were in the garden when the doorbell rang. "That must be Alan and Mary," Amy said, rising from her seat. "I'll go let them in." She headed into the house, greeting her friends as I heard them. Moments later, I stood as she returned with Alan and Mary. They were a pleasant-looking couple with friendly smiles, but what caught my attention unexpectedly was Mary pushing a large, somewhat old-fashioned pram. I hadn't realized they had a baby with them. Approaching them, Amy introduced us. Mary uncovered the pram and lowered the hood, revealing a baby girl in a pink dress. "And this is Amy," Mary proudly announced. "She's 6 months old. Isn't she adorable?" I had to agree. Little Amy was a picture-perfect baby, happily cooing in the warm sunlight. After introductions, we settled in the garden, enjoying sandwiches and tea. I wasted no time in asking Alan and Mary about their experiences in each other's bodies. They responded so calmly and rationally that doubts began to infiltrate my skepticism. Perhaps mind-swapping was actually possible, though I wasn't yet convinced. They seemed visibly disappointed by my skepticism, almost as if I had doubted their intelligence. However, Amy's face slowly lit up with amusement as she exchanged a grin with Mary, who mirrored the smile. For a moment, I felt uneasy, as if they shared some inside joke about me, but I pushed the thought aside. The rest of the day passed pleasantly. After Amy cooked a superb roast dinner, we played a few card games before winding down with hot drinks before bed. As I undressed, I suddenly felt unusually tired, attributing it to the mental strain of the day. Barely settling into bed and switching off the light, I drifted instantly into sleep. Morning came abruptly as I awoke to the sound of voices. Opening my eyes, I was stunned. I wasn't in my bed or my room. I lay on one of the examination couches in the laboratory. Trying to sit up, I discovered I was securely strapped down. Thick leather restraints bound my wrists, ankles, waist, and chest, leaving me only able to raise my head slightly off the small pillow beneath it. As I blinked awake, Amy peered down at me with a smile. "Good morning, Daniel. Awake at last, I see. How are you feeling?" "How do you think I feel, all tied up like this?" I retorted. "Come on, Angie, enough of the joke. Untie these straps." She grinned, joined by Alan, Mary, and her father. "In due time, my dear," Amy smirked. "But not until you've learned a lesson in humility. Your doubts yesterday verged on ridicule, so we've decided not only to prove our success but also to show you how wrong you were. Trust me, what we have planned will achieve both." "Don't worry," she reassured quickly. "You won't be harmed by this experience, and I suspect you might even thank us eventually." Suddenly alarmed, I asked, "What experience? What are you going to do to me?" "Well," Amy explained, "I've volunteered you to join Alan and Mary as participants in our successful mind swap. For now, you need to remain restrained like this for control. Believe me, Daniel, I wish it weren't necessary, but it's for your own benefit. Your questioning of our intelligence was excessive, and you need this lesson. Moreover, your participation will greatly assist our research. Rest assured, you'll come to no harm, aside from your pride, which might not be a bad thing. Consider it a humbling experience." Lying back, I took a moment to absorb the situation. Being strapped down was unsettling, stripping away my sense of autonomy, but I resolved not to panic. Gathering my thoughts, I posed a question. "Well," I began, "if I'm swapping bodies with someone, who exactly am I swapping with?" Amy chuckled lightly and replied, "Who will it be?" "Ah, a good question indeed. Well, dear, to ensure you deeply regret doubting our sanity so bluntly, your mind swap partner is right over there." They all stepped aside, revealing baby Amy lying on a blanket on the other couch. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively jerked against my restraints, futilely. Cold fear washed over me as I pleaded with Amy. "No," I exclaimed. "Please, Amy, you wouldn't, you couldn't. I don't believe it, it's not possible." Amy glanced down at me, then began attaching sensors to my head alongside her father. She smiled reassuringly. "Oh yes, it is, as you're about to discover. Just relax, we'll take care of everything." Once the sensors were secured, they moved to little Amy, gently placing tiny sensors on her head. I watched with anxious dread as they continued their preparations quietly. Mary tended to Amy, ensuring her comfort, while Alan assisted Mike with final adjustments to the equipment. Realizing shouting for help was futile and struggling against my restraints pointless, I resigned myself to watching them prepare for my induction into the world of mind swapping. I glanced at Alan and Mary, hoping to convey that I wasn't a willing participant like they had been, but it was clear I wouldn't get far. Desperate, I appealed to Mary. "For heaven's sake, Mary, that's your baby over there. Are you willing to risk her as well as me?" I pleaded. She looked at me briefly, grinning. "Don't worry, Daniel," she reassured me. "Alan and I have done this several times already. It's completely safe, otherwise, I wouldn't risk Amy. She'll just have a nice little nap while Mike adds a touch of extra intelligence to her mind. When she wakes, she'll be mentally a couple of months older. It's worth it. But for you, well." She chuckled, a grin spreading across her face, unsettling me further. After thorough checks, Mike took charge. "All right, everyone," he announced. "That's about it. I believe we're ready." He glanced at me. "Stop looking so worried, Daniel. You'll be fine. In fact, you'll be the most carefully attended to person in this room. Soon, your consciousness will fade away, and moments later, everything will be different. Here we go." I watched as his hand slowly turned a dial, the last thing I saw before slipping into darkness. Within seconds, consciousness left me, and I was gone. It felt like mere moments had passed. One instant, I was strapped down on the lab couch, enveloped by darkness, and the next, I was still lying there. Or was I? Slowly, I opened my eyes and surveyed my surroundings. What I beheld was nothing short of terrifying. I was staring at myself, still in my pajamas, secured to an examination couch about 10 feet away. And I appeared profoundly unconscious. But if that figure was me, then who was I? Suddenly, I glanced up and saw my 4 companions peering down at me. Amy's face lit up with a smile. "Fantastic," she exclaimed. "It worked. How do you feel, Daniel?" That's when the first shock hit me. I tried to utter, "Terrible. What happened?" Yet, what came out of my mouth was more like, "Mflagagugu." There was a brief pause before Amy looked at me, grinned, and said, "What was that, Daniel?" I didn't quite catch it. Without thinking, I attempted to demand, "What's going on?" Yet, all that emerged was a high-pitched, blubble fooble accompanied by a dribble that soaked into the bib around my neck. A bib? Why on earth was I wearing a baby's bib? Amy and Mary erupted in laughter as I gingerly moved my head and assessed my predicament. What I saw took my breath away, prompting me to let out a tiny, high-pitched wah. It was understandable I was less than 2 feet long, with short, pink, dimpled arms protruding from my chubby little body. My tiny fingers wiggled helplessly on my uncoordinated hands. I tried to bring my widely spread chubby legs together, but with a large terry cloth diaper pinned between them and plastic baby pants on top, it was an impossible task. A diaper! My unfolding reality was becoming increasingly distressing. Slowly, I began to comprehend the absurdity of my attire. Who wouldn't be alarmed? On my feet were snug pink wool booties, tied securely with pink ribbons around the ankles. Over my diaper and plastic pants, I wore a pink baby dress, a perfect little ensemble complete with a Peter Pan collar, back buttons, and a sash belt tied in a bow. It boasted short puffed sleeves and a delicate smocking pattern adorning the front. A flawless outfit for a perfect little baby. In my semi-conscious state, the full weight of my situation hadn't entirely sunk in. Why on earth was I dressed like a baby? And how did it fit me? Then, the horrific reality dawned on me. Initially in disbelief, I attempted to sit up, but after a couple of futile efforts, I realized my coordination was utterly lacking. It felt as though I were intensely intoxicated, yet my mind was crystal clear. Trying to roll onto my side, I was thwarted by Mary's seemingly enormous, firm hands, gently guiding me back onto my back. Another attempt yielded the same result, and I soon comprehended I was completely under her control. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. I was Amy, well, not really, but I was. I was still me, but now trapped inside her tiny body, and the realization sent a shiver down my spine. Knowing how 6-month-old babies are typically cared for, I dreaded contemplating what lay ahead, yet I was utterly powerless to do anything about it. There must have been a look of understanding in my eyes, because suddenly Amy leaned over me and said, Well, it appears Daniel has taken up residence in a different body for a while. Don't worry, dear, Amy's consciousness is safely stored in the computer, and Mary and Alan have graciously agreed to care for you just as you are for a few weeks. I raised my short arms in protest, exclaiming, Plubberlumph. More drool dripped onto my bib, frustration welled up inside me, but Amy simply smiled and continued in a more matter-of-fact tone. Now, Daniel, I know you can understand everything we say, but Amy's vocal cords aren't fully developed yet, so you can't speak properly, you'll only babble. Dad has made some adjustments to your brain patterns, so when you try to speak, all that will come out is baby talk. She chuckled. You'll be stuck like this until we decide to switch you back, and that won't happen until I'm convinced you've learned your lesson. The delightful part, she continued, is that trapped as you are in Amy's body, you'll experience the everyday life of a sweet little 6-month-old baby girl. You won't have the strength to resist Mary and Alan treating you as such. You'll take your bottle, wet your diaper, and do the other as babies do, and in every way, you'll endure it until I deem you've suffered enough for your behavior. And don't worry about your own body, added her father. We won't be transferring Emily's mind into it, as she couldn't possibly handle the situation for obvious reasons. We'll take excellent care of it though, and I assure you, aside from some muscle weakness, it will be in good condition when and if we allow you to return to it. You seem quite healthy, so we may take this opportunity to extend your mind swap longer than usual. Emily's memory file is relatively undeveloped at this stage, making it easy to maintain in stasis almost indefinitely without any adverse effects, so she'll be fine. Oh, and speaking of time, Amy added, you still have 3 weeks of vacation left, so they won't miss you at work. And if we decide to extend your treatment, don't worry. I'm sure we can come up with a convincing excuse to keep you away indefinitely. We'll just say you're ill or something. Dad can arrange a doctor's certificate, no problem. What could I say to that? Well, not much actually, since my vocabulary was now reduced to goo goo gaga mflmp. Great. I couldn't even ask for help. Suddenly, they began discussing the situation among themselves, and I started to realize how much babies are overlooked as if they hardly exist when adults have things to discuss. I lay there helplessly on the couch while they talked, until they separated, and Mary said, Okay then, I'll go get Amy's pram. Her pram? Oh boy, this was going to be humiliating. She left the room and returned pushing the pram. She wheeled it alongside me, and Amy sat me up while Mary took a white leather set of baby reins out of the pram. Helpless to resist, my arms were thrust into the reins, and they were firmly buckled behind me. It was becoming incredibly embarrassing as I realized just how helpless I was. Mary effortlessly lifted me and laid me on my back inside the pram. With practiced ease, she clipped 2 leather straps attached to the inside of the pram onto my baby reins. They tightened around me, securing me to the pram's mattress, unable to sit up or even turn over. Frustrated by my lack of freedom, I tried to undo the straps, but my tiny, weak fingers were no match for the stiff buckles and clips, and I knew I was imprisoned in the pram until Mary chose to release me. She placed a small pillow under my head and then took out a soft bunny rug from under the pram, draping it over me and tucking it in snugly. Suddenly, I felt warm and comfortable, aside from the confinement of the pram's baby harness. Satisfied that I was securely restrained, the others went about their tasks in the laboratory, leaving me to my own devices. I lay there for about an hour attempting to use my fingers, but quickly found them too inadequate to accomplish anything useful. Eventually, I simply closed my eyes and tried to sleep, much like most small babies do most of the time. Let's face it, lying in a pram for hours on end with nothing else to do can be pretty boring, as I was about to discover. Then, I was abruptly awakened as the pram's brake was released, and I was pushed into the house and into the dining room. The aroma of food cooking reached me, and suddenly, I felt hungry. Boy, was I in for a disappointment. "All right," Amy said. "Mary, let's feed Amy first, and then we can have lunch." "Okay," Mary replied, "I'll just use the kitchen for a minute." I lay there in the pram, unaware of the next impending humiliation, but it didn't take long to arrive. Suddenly, Mary entered the room with Amy. She carried a tray and set it down on the dining room table beside me. Then she leaned over, unclipped the pram's restraining straps from my baby reins, and sat me up while Amy placed pillows around me to keep me upright. Sitting there, I looked over at the tea tray and saw a small bowl of infant cereal, a jar of apricot puree, and a baby bottle of milk. My heart sank as I realized this was to be my meal. Even in the guise of a 6-month-old baby, the expression on my face was clearly understood by my girlfriend, who chuckled down at me. "That's right, Daniel," she teased. "This is the kind of food you'll be eating from now on, so you'd better get used to it." Then, sitting beside me, she picked up the bowl of cereal and added, "Now, open wide, there's a good girl." Horrified at the prospect of being fed like an infant, I attempted to voice my protest, but predictably, all that came out was a high-pitched blump. Their laughter filled the room as Amy swiftly shoveled the first spoonful of tasteless mush into my mouth. Caught off guard, I reluctantly swallowed it, wrinkling my tiny turned-up nose in disgust. It wasn't so much the taste as the lack thereof that was appalling, and contemplating being fed such fare regularly was a dismal thought. Spoonful by spoonful, Amy ensured I consumed every bit of the baby cereal, despite a generous amount ending up smeared around my face from my uncoordinated attempts to eat. Finally, she set down the empty bowl. "There's a good girl, Amy," she cooed, "now for your dessert." She opened the jar of apricot puree and began spooning it into my mouth. To my relief, it actually didn't taste too bad, and aside from the profound embarrassment of being fed in such a manner, I found it tolerable enough. After finishing my dessert, Amy set the jar aside and wiped my mouth with the corner of my bib. She then untied the bib from behind my neck and placed it on the tray. Removing the pillows that had propped me up, she gently laid me back down and fastened the pram's restraining straps to my baby reins once more. I lay there, completely immobilized. Leaving a small pillow under my head, Amy picked up the baby bottle and grinned with evident satisfaction as she brought the teat to my closed lips. "Come on, Amy," she coaxed, "take your bottle like a good little girl." Knowing I had no other choice and that this was my only means of getting any liquid, I obediently opened my mouth. Supporting the bottle, she inserted the teat past my lips and almost toothless gums, and I began to suck compliantly. To an adult, a baby bottle teat or pacifier might seem small, but they are designed to comfortably fill a baby's mouth. To me, however, the teat felt enormous. I steadily drank the overly warm, sweet milk from the bottle, and after what felt like an eternity, I finally finished the last drop. Amy withdrew the teat from my mouth and set the bottle aside. "There's a good little girl," she praised with a smile. "Now here's something to keep you quiet while we have our tea." She picked up a pacifier from a corner of the pram and gently inserted it into my mouth. Seeing no point in protesting such humiliation by spitting it out, I began to suck on it instead. Strangely, it soon became natural, and I understood why pacifiers are also called soothers. Mary took a soft pink woolen blanket from under the pram, draped it over me, and tucked it snugly around me. Then she raised the pram hood and instructed, "Now, just lie there quietly while we have our tea. And no crying, please. Unlike the real Amy, we know you can understand everything we say, so I suggest you do as you're told. I can think of some wonderful ways to punish you if you don't, so I strongly advise you to behave. Now, lie there quietly." She turned away to join the others, and I lay there quietly sucking on my pacifier, gazing up at the white plastic lining of the pram hood. I sighed inwardly, realizing the consequences of my mocking comments about Mike's experiment. I wondered how long they intended to keep me like this, but in my current state, I couldn't even ask. All I could do was wait helplessly for whatever was to come next. Lying in my pram, tantalized by the sight and smell of beef casserole, I squirmed in frustration within my harness. Unable to join their dinner conversation despite understanding every word, I blushed with humiliation as they intermittently cooed at me in baby talk, their broad grins mocking my predicament. Dessert followed, then coffee and liqueurs, and all the while, I lay there knowing I was sentenced to a diet of baby food for the foreseeable future. I groaned inwardly at the thought, no more steak, wine, or chicken vindaloo. Just bland mush, fruit puree, and milk bottles with teats. Instead of enjoying sweets, I'd suck on a pacifier. Yuck. I was certainly paying dearly for my skepticism. Finally, they rose from the table. Alan and Mary prepared to depart, donning their coats. Amy approached, pulling a navy blue waterproof pram apron from a nearby bag and draping it over me. As she fastened it securely with clips, she chuckled softly. "Now be a good little girl, Amy," she teased. "No tantrums. If you behave, we'll consider returning you to your preferred state. Bye-bye, Poppet." Amy kissed my forehead, adjusted the apron flap to cover most of the pram hood opening, and secured it in place with elastic loops. They bid their farewells, and suddenly, I felt the pram brake released and it being wheeled forward. Tears of frustration welled as I realized I was truly being taken home with Alan and Mary, condemned to live as a 6-month-old baby girl for the foreseeable future. In a final act of defiance, I spat out my pacifier and attempted to yell at them to stop. Predictably, only garbled sounds escaped my lips, ubi, met with laughter. The pram crossed the threshold into the chilly night air. Despite my turmoil, I felt strangely protected under the warm baby blanket within the well-sprung pram, shielded by its hood and apron. We had only been on our way for a few minutes when I heard the soft tapping of raindrops on the pram hood. Moments later, the sound paused briefly. Suddenly, my limited view through the pram apron blurred as a clear plastic rain cover was draped over and secured in place. With that done, we continued our journey. I couldn't gauge how much time passed until I heard the gate open, signaling our arrival at Alan and Mary's home. Soon, the pram was wheeled inside, and the lights illuminated the room as it came to a stop. Mary promptly removed the rain cover and apron, lowering the hood. It was clear we were in their lounge. Smiling down at me, Mary addressed me. "Here we are, Daniel, or should I say, Emily. Welcome to your new home. Stay put for a moment while I go run your bath." She exited the room, and shortly after, I heard the bath water running. When it ceased, she returned downstairs.